Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. So I saw a report, I think a week or two ago, that an organization called Center Ice Canadians have decided they're going to investigate whether they should actually become a political party, a new political party in the center of the political spectrum. And so we're joined tonight by Rick Peterson, who runs an investment bank. He is a former candidate for leadership of the Conservative Party of Canada, and Dominic Carty, who is a member of the provincial legislature in New Brunswick, a former cabinet minister, now an independent, who are the two principals of this group that are looking at starting a new political party in Canada. Rick Peterson, Dominic Carty, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us on.
Thank you. So tell me, are you guys going to create a new political party?
We're looking at it, and it's like we're about to send out Rick Peterson just wrote a really good email that we're sending out to our thousands of people who signed up for our email list saying, we've heard that people want this. Now we've got to see what the actual engagement is, because this can't be a project of, this can't be the Rick and Dominic show. So we're looking for members to sign up across the country, people who are interested in joining a new party. We're looking to show that we've got the fundraising chops to be able to sustain something like this. And then we've got to start working this summer on developing the policies that we hope are going to attract people that are actually going to be different and new, not just a rejection of old parties, but something that's actually going to respond to today's political crises and challenges.
Rick, why do you think that there's room for another political party in the center of the political spectrum?
You know, Brian, we started the journey about a year ago with this group, as you know, and you've been kind enough to have us on your show before, so thank you again, as a platform for centrist, pragmatic, science-based discussions of policy and stuff, and quickly found there was two key things that have taken us in this direction. Number one, an amazing number of people that signed up who said, we want you to become a political party. And then the second group of it was, we found out through a survey that we commissioned to really find out, are we just in an echo box, or what is there across Canada? Is there really a demand across Canada? And I'll let Dominique talk about the survey because he's been experienced on the polling side. But we found a very strong base of people open to the idea, open to discovering it in different regions, different cities, different centers. So what we're doing right here, Brian, is, let's be clear about it. If we find out that there is sufficient organizational support, financial support, and people who have the chops on the political organizing side to step forward, then we'll green light it. But if not, we won't. We'll continue to advocate in any other way we can, but it is an option that's on the table.
Why do you think there is that opportunity, though? Like, what's your position? What's your argument that the Conservatives have moved to the right, the Liberals have moved to the left, or what?
Yeah, well, that's the survey that we commissioned. So we talked to 2,000 Canadians across the country. So randomly selected. The survey was done by a high quality public research firm, so we're confident in the results. But the numbers were overwhelming. 70% of Canadians identify themselves as being in the center, but at the same time, over 50% of Canadians say that the existing parties are moving off to the extremes. Over the last 5 years, supporters of the Liberal and Conservative Party in particular feel their parties have become more left and right wing. So you're seeing a lot of Canadians who just don't see the existing parties reflecting what they want. And this isn't, one of those nice, comfortable moments like we kind of had in the 90s when the world was rolling along nicely and it seemed like democracy was getting stronger around the world and things were getting better and we didn't have a deficit and we didn't have odd governments in the US and scary ones in Europe fighting each other. So what we see is that Canadians still have the same basic priorities. They want to see the healthcare system fixed. They want to see jobs. They want to see government run competently. The only new thing that really popped up on the top list of policies was housing because of the housing crisis across the country that's being driven in part by our success. But Canadians that we surveyed didn't see that any of the existing parties had answers to those questions. And so what we're looking at here is I take inspiration from Andrew Coyne, who wrote a column about our effort. And he said, look, this is great if it's going to mean something different. If it's just going to mean something in the mushy middle that's going to be halfway Liberal, halfway Tory, no one needs that. And that's not why Rick or I are here. And none of the people who've signed up to put a lot of effort into center-right, that's not what they're saying either. They're saying that we're not hearing any of the existing parties talking about any solutions to any of these problems. So we got to come up with actual solutions. And Rick, I think rightly said, they got to be science-based, they got to be evidence-based, because we've got 100 years now of evidence of what works, bigger versus smaller government. We know that what actually works is government that does a small number of things well and leaves the rest to the private sector. and has a society that cares for each other, absolutely, but also rewards individual excellence and achievement. But that's all nice and easy to say, but it's got to be built around some concrete policies about how do we actually deal with our healthcare system and the challenges there. And those are the things we're going to be rolling out this summer to try and attract more people, build the organization up, and we'll see where it goes from there. Because as Rick said, if we don't see the Canadians are interested in this, it'd be kind of hypocritical for us as people who talk about putting democracy front and center if we didn't listen to the public.
And so you're sending out this questionnaire to a whole bunch of people. You're doing this poll. What are you going to do? Have a big convention in the fall or something like that? Like, what's your plan? How are you going to assess whether there's the demand for this party?
Three key things, Brian. We need to find. It's actually pretty easy to start a party. You can start the Brian Crombie. Actually, Brian, weren't you involved in a little party at one point? You know how easy that is, right? Tell us about that little experience. I mean, it's not hard to start a political party formally. Put an application into Elections Canada. You get 250 people, and then you're off to the races. But more important than that is, are we tapping into demand, right? So we can form a party on September 20th and register a name, but between now and then, we really got to find out, are there people, what are core values? What excites people to join this party? What's the vision where we're going? And what's been an amazing, we've got an extremely strong volunteer coordinator and Julie Smith in our team, and we're tapping in to find out what are people interested in. So from my point of view, on the early feedback that I've seen, and I'm going to let you chime in here on the end, but what struck me, Brian, is how optimistic people are for the future of Canada. We got the Conservative Party on one side saying that everything is broken. We got the Liberal Party on the other side that is basically, it's an ATM cash machine out there with no concern about the finances of the nation. But if you look at the potential for Canada to be an energy superpower, to be a key player in the electric battery chain, to really, step up and play a bigger role in Canada, this country is the country of the future. And if we can channel that, and the biggest element is not the policies, but it's the tone, right? It's moderate, sensible, pragmatic, but let's not be batshit crazy, right? Let's drive.
We actually consider that as the party name.
Yeah, we're not the batshit crazy party. Maybe, you never know. But Brian, to our point, and to Dominique's point, centrist can mean a whole bunch of things to different people, but it can be positive, it can be forceful, it can be optimistic, and it can be mature. And that's what we're trying to bring to the conversation.
And I think that's exactly the tone we're trying to take, is that it's got to be about, it's in the end, I was in cabinet during COVID. No one involved in New Brunswick politics when they got elected in September 2020 expected they were going to be handling a global shutdown. I can still remember when I brought the plan to the Premier in February 2020 saying, you realize we're going to have to shut down our borders with the United States. That seemed utterly insane until, of course, everyone started hearing the NBA shutting down, conventions being shut down, borders closing. So having a long list of policies with very specific prescriptions, people are tired of that because they know it doesn't mean anything. What we've got to get back to is something that's actually much more difficult for those of us putting ourselves out there as people involved in politics, is saying that here's the standards you should expect of us in terms of the evidence we'll use to make decisions, the values and principles that we bring to the table, and how we're going to handle problems. Because that stuff you can define. That no one can say how they're going to handle the next pandemic or the next war or the next crisis. We can say, Rick and I, this is how we handle challenges that we face. This is the approach we will take. And as we try and build that into a party, if others are interested, then that's something that we can develop into something that is a very different offering than the Liberals, Tories, and the NDP and the other parties going out there with often superficial approaches to specific issues, but not really giving you any idea of how they're going to handle some of the big challenges that we know are coming down the pipe towards us.
We're chatting tonight with Dominic Carty and Rick Peterson about the potential for a new political party in the center of the political spectrum called Center-Ice Canadians. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes with Dominic and Rick. Stay with us, everyone. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. It's a real pleasure of mine tonight to be chatting with Dominic Carty and Rick Peterson. They're two long-term experienced political people that have been involved in politics, been involved in party politics. Rick has run for the leadership of the Conservative Party. Dominic has been a cabinet minister in the Conservative government in New Brunswick. And they are proposing, potentially, they're researching to create a new political party called Center-Ice Canadians. And I think the argument that you put forward is that there is a hole in the middle of the political spectrum, in the center of the political spectrum, center-ice Canadians being the description you've used to describe that opportunity, because the Liberals have moved to the left and the Conservatives have moved to the right. But yet you say the vast majority of Canadians say that they're in that center. So why have we come to this? If the vast majority of Canadians are actually in the middle of the political spectrum, why have the Conservatives moved to the right and the Liberals moved to the left?
I think part of it comes from what someone who's been involved in center-ice from the outset, Tasha Karitan, has nicely described as rage farming, which is a phrase I know is often thrown around, that as we spend more and more of our time online, the social media companies, the algorithms they use drive us to have conflict. It's what generates clicks, it generates engagement. And so if you had never been to Earth before and you landed here and you looked at our social media in Canada and said, okay, what are the most important issues affecting Canadians? You would never guess that it was some of the issues I mentioned earlier, bread and butter issues, concerns around what's happening in Europe, those sort of priorities. You would think that it was an obsession about trans kids playing sports on one side. You would think it was trying to take away people's cars on the other side. That we've got extremist content driven by amoral algorithms, and in some cases amplified by bad actors, because we know that the countries that aren't on side with Canada or Canadian values, the Russians, the Chinese, like to amplify these messages just to create confusion. And sadly, because I don't think that we have any real strong animating principles that drive either the Liberal or Conservative parties at the moment beyond winning votes, they play into that. So you've got Pierre Poilievre, who's happy to sit down with some of the folks involved in the convoy last year, who are people who reject Canadian values and democracy, who are not, I've seen people argue that we should be restricting the right to vote, that women should have their rights taken away. And we have a national political party making common cause.
No, Dominic, come on. You're not actually suggesting that people in the Conservative Party are arguing we should take votes away from women, are you?
Yes. Yeah, I've received emails from these people. Absolutely. And on the other side, we've got people who are advocating for some sort of effort to rehabilitate communism. And those people have an impact on the left of center parties. And if you're a politician who doesn't get into the business because you've got a strong set of driving moral values yourself, you look at the volume of emails you get and you go, you know what, everyone really wants to talk about? How much I hate vaccines. I mean, Rick, I don't want to remind you of the election yesterday in Alberta, but that's what half of that campaign talking about horrible things being said about either people who got vaccinated or didn't.
Well, they were the most prejudiced group in Canadian history, were they not?
According to some people, yes. So that's right. So that's an example of how debased our politics has become, when we've got to step back from that and look at our society. And we've got this incredibly fragile country. And I don't mean fragile in terms of the people, but we've built up a lot of very complicated infrastructure. Our power grid, transport system, all these things that we often talk about because they're not working as well as they used to. Those are all things that are supposed to be the number one job of politicians to look after, to run, and to fix when they don't work. We never talk about those things. We spend our time on these issues that are great at generating clicks on Facebook and Twitter, but don't do anything to actually make life better for Canadians. So it's about coming back again to articulating a set of values with some policies to illustrate them. But the values are more important, that we're going to start doing things differently. And we're obviously trying. One of the challenges with moving in a direction like we are right now is we don't want to be too prescriptive. Again, Rick and Dominic sitting here saying this is everything we want because we want to build a national movement. But we want to make it pretty clear that what we're expecting is a higher level of behavior from politicians in terms of the way they act, the things that they do, and the way that they express ideas to the public and then follow through on them if we're ever given the honor of having that chance if this project actually works.
I saw an article that quoted Jenny Byrne, who I think is the former campaign manager for Pierre Poilievre and the former campaign manager for Stephen Harper. And she was quoted saying, and I'm paraphrasing here, something to the effect of, we don't try to persuade independent or undecided voters anymore. All we want to do is motivate our base.
Yeah.
How have politics changed that we don't care about persuasion anymore? All we want to do is motivate our base.
So there's two elements to that, Brian. The one of the beauties of forming a new party is we get to write a constitution that will, if we get enough support for it, will take away some of the weaknesses of the existing membership-driven leadership campaigns or the ability for special interest groups to come over and to dominate the discussion inside a party. And the second part of that, Brian, is that most of the survey results and even the emails that Dominique and I and the whole center-ice team, there's about a dozen of us there, working on this are getting are from people who abhor the party structure. You don't want to be part of a party. Who would want to be part of a party that is focused on small issues, but most importantly, spends their time in the House of Commons shouting at other people and at the same time offering no value for what you do? So Dominic talked about a movement, Brian. And if you think about it, what we've got here at Center Ice is it's a movement. There's a couple thousand people across Canada that are organically joining, signing up, saying we want to be a part of this. So if you remember in Quebec, the Quebec Solidaire started off as a movement and became a political party. And what is so encouraging about the feedback we're getting is it's skewing younger, urban families. Think about that. Younger, urban families who are probably very few of them signing up for political parties right now. Dominic, correct me if I'm wrong. Was it 27% of the surveyed people said they would be considered to be adhering to a political party, but like the balance, nobody wants to belong or is part of a political party for these reasons. So we've got a movement that's got values, that's got interest, demographically is skews younger and educated and urban. This is interesting. This is interesting to see where it's going to go.
Haven't parties become very leader-oriented, and it's almost a PMO or a leader-oriented political system today? And I think about, the Liberal Party with Dion and Ray and Ignatieff was almost dead, was in third place. And if it wasn't for someone with an incredibly powerful last name and a lot of charisma, most people thought the Liberal Party would go away. In fact, there were a lot of articles. You quoted Andrew Coyne earlier. I think Andrew Coyne actually wrote an article about the Liberal Party in Canada following in the footsteps of the Liberal Party of the United Kingdom. Pierre Poilievre is similarly very charismatic, and I think carried a huge amount of weight in his victory, obviously. How can you think that you're going to be able to compete in an era of leader-oriented politics?
I think part of it is that we talk about doing things differently and then show we're actually ready to do that. That doesn't mean that we shy away from having strong figures out there. Neither Rick or I think would be described as shrinking violets by anyone who knows us. We get out there and we build based on something better than that. And I spent most of my life working in politics, and I've worked for parties in a couple of dozen countries around the world. I'm under no illusions about how difficult this is going to be. But at the same time, as Rick was saying, we're hearing that there's an appetite from people who are not interested in what they're getting right now. And something else that I found interesting is that the media response to the letter that went out that Rick put his name to a couple of weeks ago saying, we are looking at doing this, is that right away, we got prominent national level liberal and conservative operatives saying, well, this is a terrible idea. This is never going to work. And you look at the number of parties that are registered in Canada. I have not heard any of those folks talking about the Animal Rights Party or any of the other legion numbers of small little political parties that have been founded that have caused liberal and conservative national level activists to say anything at all. They know that this is a black hole in the center of our politics. And they know that they have done nothing to shine any light in that black hole. And they have exacerbated that, just exactly like you were saying. Jenny Byrne out there saying, we don't care about the undecided. We're just going to rage farm our base until they turn out at a level that's 2% higher than the rage farmed base on the left, and we'll win on turnout. So what that does is this looks superficially democratic because it's mass politics. Everyone's involved. But it's actually the worst form of mass politics that I've seen in countries which have fallen into really bad traps with bad government, because it looks democratic, but in the end, people don't have any control because all the power goes back into that premier's office, the prime minister's office. And there are things that you can do to fix that. But those changes require work with experts that's boring and time consuming. And that's what we got to get back to talking about. We would not hire any of us who've been involved in business watching your show. We wouldn't hire someone who's got no business experience. We wouldn't hire someone who's never run anything before. But we've somehow or other built this astonishingly complex multi-trillion-dollar enterprise. And we just act as though, well, just anyone can do this. And, hey, if they got a nice smile and turn up well on Twitter algorithms, then, hey, we're off to the races. That is not going to be enough to keep our democracy going. We are under threat from threats, exterior and interior, to our country. We better figure out how to handle them because the current system isn't working. Our prescription might not be the right one, but hey, we're going to try it and we'll see what happens.
But Dominic, we believe in democracy. We believe that everyone deserves a vote. And so if all those
Absolutely.
people that deserve a vote want to vote for that person that may not have great resume and would never
Sure.
be hired by a recruiting board of directors, but has got charisma, and even if all they've done their whole career is work in politics, they still earned that vote and got elected.
Yep, definitely not talking there, but anyone whose first and last initials start with P. Yeah, that's absolutely that. But that's part of the problem, is that we've degraded politics to the point that it is a competition between the hairstyles of Justin Trudeau, the turban of Jagmeet Singh, and the glasses of Pierre Poilievre. That's the stuff that we spend our time talking about. We're going to have to continue to fight in that world, which is going to mean snappy sound bites, good communications, effective comms. But it also means there has to be some substance behind it. And the difference between politics now and I think 30 years ago is that you had the beginning of that sort of spin-based politics for sure. Clinton, Blair, Chrétien were all experts at that, the people who really dominated politics in the 90s. But behind those guys, there were massive teams of capable people who knew what they were doing. I would argue the same with Harper's government. That is now disappearing. We've seen firsthand, and because Rick and I have got connections to the Conservatives, we know more about some of these stories. But there has been a purge of people who are in the center who are interested in talking to undecided voters out of that party. We've heard from Liberal friends that they're going through the same thing. So when you have people who are in politics because they want to do a better job of delivering excellent public services and to try and change our culture and society to make it as resilient and as strong as possible, when those folks feel like they don't have any political home anywhere, clearly there's something wrong. And again, we might not have the best remedy, but as science-based people, we'll put our prescription up in front of the experts, who in this case are the voters of Canada, see what they have to say.
Hold it. Dominic, you said a purge. You actually think that people in the Conservative Party have been purged from that party?
Absolutely, 100%, without any equivocation, doubt, or nuance in my statement. Absolutely. There have been people who have been told, who are in the center ground of politics, that their perspective and feelings are not welcome. Look at the staffing changes in the party office. It's been happening consistently across the country. We have people who, here in my province in New Brunswick, all 10 of our federal riding associations for the Conservative Party were taken over by supporters of Poilievre. In talking to folks who've been involved in politics here since the Richard Hatfield days back in the 70s, they've gone to these meetings and say they have no idea who any of these people are. They're mobilized by fears over vaccines, lockdowns, the World Economic Forum, 15-minute cities, which in New Brunswick is extremely weird because you can get across any city in New Brunswick in less than 5 minutes. All of these odd conspiracies, mostly imported from the States, those are what is driving, sadly, a lot of the grassroots of one of our major political parties. Equally sadly, for the Liberals and the NDP to an extent as well, they're being driven by a retaliation against those messages. So you've got an obsession with talking about Donald Trump and how terrible he is and the Americanization of our politics. So it's just this sterile back and forth. None of it, again, has anything to do with stuff that concerns me and the folks I talk to right now, which is, why don't anyone in my family have access to a family doctor? Why is our infrastructure falling apart? Why does it cost more to buy a cell phone and buy an airline ticket in Canada than just about anywhere else in the world? Why is our military so massively under-resourced that we have a 5-year plan based on this year's budget to replace the shells that we've already sent to Ukraine without any plan for a long-term look at our defense strategy, despite the fact that the Russians and the Chinese have both said they're coming for us? These huge global challenges, climate change, we've got one party saying it doesn't exist and the other party saying that we fix it by taking money from people's pockets. Where is the spirit that actually built our country up of innovation, talking about how technology can make life better for people so we can save the great stuff that makes Canada the best place in the history of the planet to live and build on it, not ignoring the problems that we have, but also not being ridiculous and saying that they're either so large we can't fix them, or that it's outside of our responsibility to look at them. We can fix problems. And I think we need a party and an option that talks about how we're going to do that. I don't see any of the current guys doing it. And they are spending their time purging people who disagree with their leaders on things that are only marginal concern to most Canadians because they don't make a difference to most Canadians' lives.
Is this different than has occurred in the past? In the past, have our parties been Big Tent parties that have allowed different, what's the old Lincoln think about the rivalry of
Team of rivals. Yeah.
The team of rivalries? Is that what happened in the past, and we're somehow changing things, or have successful leaders recreated the party in their own likeness?
Brian, I think every leader has a mandate to create a party under his or her own leadership, because if you win the leadership of a party, then you have earned a majority of the number of people that have signed up for a membership to become the leader. But there is a difference between the tone that you take in a campaign, the tone that you take towards government. And I think one of the biggest things that I think we're trying to bring and that's attracting people to us is simply the tone of politics, the approach of politics. And campaigns and politics and political party is elbows up, we all know. And to say that there aren't feelings hurt is naive. People are going to be pushing and going to be trying to move forward on a mandate. And one of the things that I think has struck me on the feedback we've got coast to coast is people who've come forward to us are just looking for something different. They're looking for something different. And I think, the elements that Dominique pointed out are obvious to some of us and maybe not to others. But truly, if somebody would give this group of a dozen of us the time and the credit and, donating $10, $20 each to help us out, why are they doing that? Because they want something different. That's why our tagline is doing politics differently. So, you know what, if you're in the political game, it's like being on the hockey, you're going to get an elbow. You're going to have things go that are sideways. But the way that you conduct yourself, the way that you open up yourself to new people or new ideas, there's such a demand for this right now, Brian, and there is nobody in the middle that seems to be offering this. And that's why we are exploring the route that we're going. If we continue to get the feedback that we've had so far, you have a legitimate base, offer your ideas and your people up. And more than just, as I mentioned at the start of this, more than just enrolling, getting your party, getting your name out there, you need a movement behind you. And we are judging, engaging whether there is a sufficient movement, but people are telling us they want something different. And that's what we'll find out if we can do it.
Well, it sounds like an interesting endeavor, no question. And I would argue that people do want something different in the middle. Let's talk about it some more after we take a break for some messages with Rick Peterson and Dominic Carty, who are thinking about launching a new party, Center-Ice Canadians. Stay with us, everybody. Back in 2. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm having an interesting conversation tonight with Rick Peterson. He is an investment banker. He's a former leadership aspirant for the Conservative Party of Canada, and Dominic Carty, who is a former cabinet minister in the province of New Brunswick. He's a current MLA in New Brunswick. And they're launching an effort to look at whether Canada needs a new political party, a political party of the centre called Center-Ice Canadians, their current name. I want to disagree with the contention that you made, Rick, just a couple of minutes ago, if I could, and give you a little bit of an argument. I think that numerous different governments that have been successful in the past have actually been a team. And I think about, Turner being the finance minister for Trudeau. And when he left, Trudeau wasn't as successful as he was. Martin being finance minister for Chrétien. And when they ended up having disagreements, Chrétien wasn't nearly as successful. I think that the Conservative Party historically has often been a marriage of someone from Quebec and someone from Western Canada or English Canada. I think that some of the most successful governments we've had in Canadian history have been, combinations of different people from different parts of Canada, and often different segments of society. I think that one of the things about the Liberal Party historically, while they've had strong leaders that have often been from the center left, they've often had a counterpoint in cabinet of someone who's from Bay Street, someone who's got some business creds, has got some experience. And I worry that today, maybe it's because of our leader-oriented politics, maybe it's because of this trend to appeal to the base, maybe it's the rage that you're talking about, but that we've become less of a big tent and more of just one person being the only person that has something to say. And I think about, I could mention, you could probably do far better than I, but I could mention 5 cabinet ministers in the Trudeau era that were of benefit. I could mention numerous ministers in the Mulroney area. I'm not sure about Harper, probably a couple. I don't know if I could mention much of the front bench of either of the current political parties in Ottawa today.
I thought that was just me and I was getting old. So I was actually having that conversation with my dad the other day. Exactly that. Yeah, I can remember like Marc Lalonde and some of these other heavyweights from Trudeau Senior's government that just they had independent profile and weight to them in a way that most ministers aren't able to today. But that comes back to the survey that we did a couple of months back now, that most Canadians see themselves on a spectrum from center left to center right, and are very comfortable if they're on the center left with some things on the center right, and vice versa. Because one of the things that kind of defines identifying yourself in the center of politics is a tolerance to people who disagree with you, because you don't see yourself as having all the solutions, which having one of the downsides of having spent my life in politics, especially in some odd countries, is you get to meet lots of people who have very strong political opinions, who are very extreme. And the one thing that sort of defines an extremist is that they won't listen to anyone else. Unfortunately, extremists will put in a lot of volunteer time. If you really believe in something, no matter how crazy it is, there's lots of folks who will go out there and put all their effort in and all their money and convince their friends and family that whatever it is they believe in is true and really important. Trying to build a movement around, what we need to do is to increase the efficiency of the output of our public sector by 3.6% over the next 18 months. Not quite the same level of sexiness. Much more important, but not as sexy. So part of it is recognizing, again, that change in politics where absolutely we've got to compete with a strong leader. We've got to compete with clear taglines and clear messaging. There's nothing wrong with clear communications and having a strong leader. Humans are pack animals, and that tends to be what we gravitate towards. All the political efforts to create non-hierarchical political structures have all ended up with whoever the strongest guy was just taking power and imposing that on everyone else. So, we're not trying to change human nature here. We are saying, though, that we could do a little bit better than this, what we've seen recently, where the Conservative Party have desperately looked for leader after leader after leader who will take them out of the wilderness without particular bench strength, without a strong policy platform beyond ability to engage a base. And the Liberals have kind of did the same with Mr. Trudeau, who, for all of his skills, hasn't exactly transformed the country. And I'd similarly say, let's name one thing that he's done outside of handling COVID. Legalization of marijuana is the one that comes to my mind in terms of something that's changed the country. But beyond that, that's already been done in lots of other places. What else?
I'm going to disagree a little bit with you, Dominic. I think his childcare policy was a really important policy.
That's considering I signed it in New Brunswick, maybe that's just me taking too much. That is a big deal, and there are things that need to be changed with it, but certainly, yeah.
Brian, let's just back up. So how did I just can't see again? You were disagreeing. I agree with what you said, but how does that disagree with what I said earlier?
I was wondering that too.
Yeah. Because
so to put you on the spot, what did I say? What did I say that is counter to your views of each PM having a strong team behind him? I don't know if did I miss that?
Because I do think that we've had this success in the past of people that have had teams, and I do think that that's a major change. And I'm trying to think through. I think that we've had some success in doing what you're calling for within the existing political parties.
I see.
Only when we've had crises. I think about the Canadian peso crisis in the early 1990s when Paul Martin was given a lot of power and a lot of influence, was able to bring financial stability and sustainability to Canada. But he did have the benefit.
No, he didn't, Brian. He was no. He got spanked by the International Monetary Fund. Don't ever think that he was given power to do it. Right? Canada's debt was about to be downgraded. It was the International Monetary Fund. It was 60 cents on the dollar, and they knocked on our door and they said, "You get your act together, or else you're going to get downgraded."
Well, and that's my point. They had a crisis. So if it wasn't for the crisis, it might not have happened. And it did have the benefit that he had Bay Street credibility, and he had the support, maybe because of the crisis, but he did have the support of the Prime Minister. I think that Macron has been able to do what you're talking about, but Macron didn't have to create a political party because he didn't need to run in a parliamentary system. It was a presidential system, and he could just run for leader of the country. And it was after he was successful.
He did start a party.
France. I lived there for 10 years. So France, political parties form around people. I think the name of his party right now is even different than it was when he ran for power. There is a parliamentary system, though, because he has to win a majority in the National Assembly after he becomes the president to be able to pass his laws.
Yeah, right? So he did it, but he did it after he won. So it's a lot easier. If Rick Peterson became president of Canada, it'd be a lot easier to centerize Canadians to win thereafter in the forthcoming election.
No, but I think it's important, and we're going to turn back to Dominique. But the whole element of a team. I haven't been elected, but Dominique has, and cabinet is a team. A government is a team. Dominique has he can tell you about how that works or not. What we're trying to do inside Center Ice Canadians is we're just putting together a team that all has singing from a common song sheet that nobody else is singing from right now. That's all. We'll end up having a leader. We'll have an interim leader. We'll have a leader. We'll figure out how that happens. But this whole concept of team, Brian, I 100% agree from where you're coming from. There's no
Right. So
disagreement.
and I think the thing that's changed is that, again, humans have always been leader centric. That's why we've had battles. When I was education minister, there's always the back and forth about how much of your history curriculum should just be names and dates, because there's a human tendency to look at exciting people and exciting things and the days on which exciting people did exciting things. It's human. That's why we watch sports. It's defined all the different things that humans like to do. But the difference is that we had a system that evolved over a long time that was always based on finding that strong leader, but they were always supported by a team behind them, which in many cases was seen as being too strong in some cases, because you'd have incredibly strong cabinet ministers, as we've just discussed. The change has been is that increasingly you've had the hollowing out of those back rooms and a hollowing out of the front benches in legislatures. And it's now just a focus on a leader, which in a system like ours, which isn't the French system, where it isn't presidential, is even more dangerous, because you're distorting the way that this system is supposed to work. So the Westminster system works best. Even though we just having the disagreement back and forth about Paul Martin, no one's going to disagree he was a strong finance minister, and that there was a team of people around Jean Chrétien, who many of whom's names we can again still remember decades later. Axworthy, others. There are people who made a name for Canada around the world, whether you like what they did or not. The difference now is that increasingly it is easier to focus in on the leader, because in an era where policies are made up based around focus groups, where your principles are driven by polling rather than the other way around, I would argue that we should use polls to inform how to best communicate policies and principles we already agree with. That if you have that sort of system where you really don't have leaders who believe in anything, that's when things get dangerous. And I think that's the situation we're in now. If you look at the Americans, we're not Americans, but Donald Trump became a Republican because he thought he could win the Republican nomination. I think he could just as easily have become a crazy left-winger if he thought that was going to get him a path to power. And increasingly, this sort of leader-driven politics appeals to people who are interested in getting that sort of attention rather than having any set of beliefs that they want to advance. And the tendency for Western democracies to move away from extremist politics, which is great in the post-World War II era, I think has now slid so far that we slipped for a little while there into kind of valuing politicians who didn't seem to believe anything very much at all. And that was fine when they actually were backed by a team of managers and competent bureaucrats who could actually get things done. But now we're getting into picking people who are kind of indistinguishable from celebrities. And some celebrities, I'm sure, will be very good at running multi-billion-dollar organizations, but being good at being on TikTok is not necessarily the best qualification for being prime minister.
Mulroney brought Clark into government. Obama brought Clinton into government. We could go through numerous other examples of that. Is the mistake here that Pierre Poilievre didn't bring Charest into the front bench?
Or any of the people who expressed any opinions that were even vaguely along the lines of what Charest talked about. But that's because Poilievre does have an ideology. I don't know whether he personally genuinely believes it or not. I don't know the man, but he's been willing to reach out to a group of voters who are highly mobilized and ready to work very hard for him. And he saw, quite possibly correctly, that if he had brought people who had disagreed with him, those folks would not have been mobilized. Because getting back to my comments on extremists don't like being in rooms with people who disagree with them. It's sort of the nature of being a person.
Rick, maybe I can ask you, because you actually, run for leader of the Conservative Party. I interviewed a gentleman by the name of David Crombie, not close related to me, but shares the last name. And he told me that it wasn't a merger between the Conservative Party and the Canadian Alliance. It was a takeover. And then he said, frankly, in the last little while, it was a takeover by the truck convoy people, the PCP of the Conservative Party. Hasn't been the Conservative Party that elected Poilievre. It was a takeover. What do you think? Is the problem that right-wing ideology parties have actually taken over what was the proud Progressive Conservative Party of Canada?
I was in Montreal in 2003 at the founding convention of the Conservative Party, and I was a progressive conservative, and I strongly supported the merger. There's been different waves and elements happening over the time, Brian. I'm not going to go back and redebate what happened. I would rather have a look forward, and I'm going to ask you a skill testing question that's going to show you where Canada is going. On the survey that Dominique did, or that we did, and Dominique interpreted, Brian, what city of Canada, where do you think strongest support for centrist party is? Give me a couple guesses. I'll give you 5 possibilities. I'll say Vancouver, Edmonton, Winnipeg, Quebec, and Halifax. Which one of those 5? Which one of those 5 do you think has got the strongest support for a potential centrist party? Vancouver,
Calgary.
Edmonton.
You didn't say Calgary, but I would have picked Calgary.
Well, it's Edmonton. You're right. You're right. Strongest support. So this comes back to your question. Why is there so much interest in a centrist option in Alberta? Strong conservative Alberta. Well, I think you got the answer last night. The answer last night here in Edmonton, or here in Alberta, showed a conservative majority, a vastly reduced conservative majority, 13-seat pickup by the NDP. And I haven't seen some of the numbers. I think some of the results are very close. Demographically, what's happening is Alberta is changing, Canada is changing, and at the same time, a province where the most strident, blue, libertarian, conservative voices are found, you also find this growing appetite for something in the middle. Think about that.
But then why didn't it turn? Why didn't the NDP win? And I would have said
they came close. They gained 13 seats. The Conservatives, the Conservatives had Danielle Smith ran a very good campaign. She's a great campaigner. She's a very good campaigner. Rachel Notley didn't really come out with a great campaign, and Danielle Smith won despite her many flaws that everybody knows. But she brought a message to Canadians, to Albertans, that resonated. But coming back to where
Edmonton went NDP, and all of rural Alberta went Conservative. And I would have thought, and you're the expert on that, but I would have thought,
and a third of Calgary, Brian, a third of Calgary went NDP. Third of Calgary.
Clearly, Calgary was the only way the NDP could win. And I worry that what ended up happening is the same thing I think happens all the time, is that a whole bunch of people in Calgary held their nose and voted for the lesser of two evils, or at least what they perceived as the lesser of two evils. And so they
exactly. Yeah. So that gets back to so just so we don't pick on the Conservatives exclusively, because this problem is as much with the NDP and with the Liberals, and you can really see it with the NDP, that they have had to fight off. And I had my long ago background. I was leader of the NDP here in New Brunswick. So I come by my centrism, honestly. I've been in a center left party and a center right party. The NDP has a huge problem inside its own organization with public sector trade union leaders who abhor the private sector and who are vastly more left-wing than nearly all NDP caucus members and the party as a whole and its voters. But to keep their organizational support in play to support that party, they come out with policies, and I have no inside knowledge here, but coming out with a promise for a tax increase in Alberta seemed like an odd way of winning an election. It was, however, a way for Rachel Notley, I'm sure, to maintain her coalition behind the scenes to keep her party on the rails. So you have those sorts of problems that drive people away from the center in that party. Again, leaving space for, I would argue, in that broad center, a new option that actually talks about how are we going to handle can we not in Canada have a party that supports a strong public service, but one that doesn't consume nearly the entire federal budget and shows ever decreasing results for Canadians, given that public services are supposed to be, and we talk about public servants, it's supposed to be about them providing service for Canadians, not about them existing for themselves. Lots of them do fantastic work, but we haven't had a real look at how our government works for a long time, and it's gotten a hell of a lot bigger than it was the last time we had a serious look at it. And we've stopped looking at it in terms of service delivery. I think if Rachel Notley had talked about how she was going to have the courage that Tommy Douglas did when he brought scab labor over from the UK to help launch Medicare, some sort of 21st century version of that sort of courage around some of the challenges we're facing, you would have seen Rachel Notley be elected premier. But instead, tax increases just reminded people of all the reasons that people across Canada aren't particularly keen on the NDP and are usually reluctant to give it the chance to form government. So I think it's again, the problem we have with our existing parties, the way that they're structured, either the excessive leader focus in the bigger parties, ideological baggage in the smaller parties that includes organizational ties that really make it hard for those parties to operate independently. Those are all things that are fixable with a new structure.
Well, in Alberta, you've really only got two parties, I think, right? And there's a lot of political studies that have shown and studied that if you have two parties, what ends up happening is both of those parties have to go to the extremes to actually win leadership of the party and to win the policies of the party and win the support of the parties. And so with a two-party structure, you end up getting the center of action being at the extremes of those two parties. But if what you're arguing makes sense, why isn't there a Liberal Party of Alberta? Why has the Liberal Party of the UK declined and gone away? Why have the vast majority of structures across Canada gone to two parties, and we don't have three parties in our system in most places?
Well,
we don't have parties in the center.
At the federal level, there's this party called the Federal NDP, Brian, right? And they're led by a gentleman named Jagmeet Singh. And look at the power that this gentleman has exercised on the federal agenda right now, right? So we have a three-party. We have him pulling the government to the left, which is causing a lot of center-left liberals call us, right? So there is room, Brian. There is room.
And across the country, we've seen that with, you look in Nova Scotia, the NDP went from being a third-place party to a second-place party to winning government. In Quebec, I'm 52. Growing up, if you told me that the Quebec Liberal Party and the Parti Québécois would be down in close to the single digits, and these totally brand new parties that it didn't even exist 15 years ago would be in government and opposition and running the place, that would have seemed odd. And in Alberta and Saskatchewan and in BC, you've had big changes in the way the parties have worked. That the UCP is a brand new party. The BC Liberal Party is inherited for sure some of the social credit party that existed before, but there is that churn. It's part of the problem you have in democratic politics is humans are always convinced that the world that we see when we open the windows every morning is the world that did exist yesterday and is the world that will absolutely exist tomorrow. And it's hard for us to visualize change sometimes until it happens, at which point we immediately reconcile it and then go, well, of course, everything's always been like that. It's like right now, it's hard to imagine a time before COVID. It's only been a year and a bit. Hard to imagine a time when we didn't have to listen to the Russia-Ukraine war on the news. We get used to things really fast, which is useful because you want people to live kind of a routine life because that's the way we can get up and go to work and keep things going and have happier, better lives. But there is that window for change in there. It's just a question of, do you have not just the courage to try it, but the organizational ability to try and get something out there that connects to people. So all we're talking about here, based on examples from other countries, what we're hearing from Canadians is there's clearly a space, because we've definitely heard that. We've got the numbers to back that up. There's a space people feel isn't occupied. We're going to put together an offering and see if people would like it. And again, if they do, fantastic. I think it's, Rick and I have a shared belief in the power of citizenship and why it's important to serve. We're ready to step up.
So if people want to get the survey,
go and do other things.
If people want to get the survey and have their voice heard and voice what they think you guys should be doing with Centerized Canadians, how do they do that?
Rick,
CenterizedCanadians.ca. Yeah, thanks. Sorry, Dominic. CenterizedCanadians.ca. Sign up for emails. We send them out once a week and tell people what's happening, what the plan is, report results. And by September 20th, Brian, we're going to have the big reveal. Either we go or either we stay the way we are right now and try to influence it through a platform of voices. So stay tuned, stay with us, and thanks for highlighting our efforts.
Well, I for one hope you go. I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks, Brian. And I just add on to that, if anyone has any questions, you can call me directly on my cell. It's 506-238-5550. You can also just write to me at my Gmail, dcardy, my first initial last name, @gmail.com, DCARDY@gmail.com. And I can put you in touch with Rick or anyone else in the organization. But we're serious about trying to do things differently. And hopefully the accessibility we're going to show the next little while will be an indication of how serious we are about trying to really change the way politics is done in Canada.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to take a final break and come back with some of my own concluding comments in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everyone. Rick, Dominic, good luck.
Thank you.
Brian, thank you.